The cab pulled up to the driveway and stopped. The headlights came on, illuminating the figure of my mother-in-law, Margaret Wilson, who counted out bills and handed them to the driver with measured calm. Her meticulous movements contrasted with a fleeting exchange of smiles and goodbye wishes before the yellow car disappeared behind the house. Margaret's gaze shifted to me, and for a moment her confusion was evident. Then recognition softened her features and she adjusted the handle of her leather bag. "Hello, Andrew Collins. What are you doing here?" she asked, surprise and curiosity audible in her tone. The tall, slender woman seemed both hesitant and curious, her eyes darting to the driveway for a moment, as if to confirm that the cab had already left. "Good evening," I replied, bestowing her with a quiet smile. Holding out my hand, I helped her up the stairs. Margaret took my hand and we stopped briefly, standing a few centimeters apart. I leaned over to kiss her cheek, a simple but familiar gesture that had become our tradition. "We agreed to watch the computer today," I reminded her, hoping to diffuse the lingering tension. "Oh, right. Well, let's go," she replied, her voice smoother. Margaret turned to the intercom and dialed the code. A soft beeping pierced the silence of the quiet street. With little effort, she opened the heavy door, her weight evident in the way she steadied herself. I stepped forward to grasp the handle and nodded for her to go first. She responded to my gesture with a weak smile and started up the stairs. Her movements were deliberate, each step echoing with the click of high stiletto heels on the tiled floor. Her short skirt swayed slightly as she rose, barely covering her legs. "Were you at the corporate party?" I asked carelessly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "Yes," Margaret replied succinctly, her tone neutral as she cast a brief glance back. By this time we had reached the landing and she turned to head for the elevator. I followed her, standing 2 feet away. There was a faint, pleasant scent of her perfume in the air, a subtle reminder of her understated elegance. Despite the late hour, she conducted herself with a grace that hinted at years of refinement. The old elevator rumbled to a halt in front of us and its metal doors rattled open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The flickering light overhead cast uneven shadows on the walls, giving the moment an almost nostalgic charm. Margaret stood beside me, her gaze thoughtful and calm. The silence between us was neither awkward nor forced, but rather filled with unspoken understanding. I shifted slightly, turning my attention to the floor indicator, which was rising upward with a mechanical hum. The elevator rocked gently before coming to a stop, and the doors opened with a loud clang. Margaret stepped out first, her heels tapping softly on the tiled floor as she walked towards her apartment. She rummaged through her bag and pulled out a bunch of keys. "And you're alone tonight?" I asked in a low but casual voice as I watched her unlock the door. "Yes, my husband is away fishing," she replied without hesitation. Her tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of any subtext. I followed her into the apartment, the door slamming shut behind me. Margaret didn't turn on the light. Instead, she strode confidently across the dimly lit room, her silhouette faintly illuminated by the glow of the streetlight coming through the window. I followed, intrigued by her calmness and how easily she navigated the familiar surroundings. I knew this was coming. "Would you like some tea?" she asked eventually, her voice breaking the silence with a light and welcoming tone. "Sure," I replied, feeling the heaviness of the evening's tension begin to subside. Margaret led me into the kitchen, her movements smooth and purposeful. She put the kettle on the stove, and the quiet hum of the heating element filled the quiet room. I watched her make the tea, her hands steady and purposeful. There was something almost meditative in her actions, as if she found solace in the simplicity of the task. When the tea was ready, Margaret set the cups on the table and gestured for me to sit down. The warm, inviting aroma of the brew filled the room, and I felt myself relaxing even more. As we sipped our tea, the atmosphere became more and more cozy. Margaret began to talk about her evening at the corporate party, describing the highlights and unpleasant moments with a candor that surprised me. Her laughter, soft and sincere, was infectious, and I smiled along with her, and the previous awkwardness disappeared completely. "Sounds like a good evening," I remarked, setting the cup aside. The warmth of the tea and the casualness of our conversation relaxed me completely. "It was," she replied, her smile tightening. "But I'm glad to be back home." There was a quiet sincerity in her words that echoed in the silence of the room. Time seemed to fly by quickly, and before I knew it, I was glancing at the clock. Realizing it was getting late, I reluctantly stood up. "I have to go," I said with reluctance in my voice. Margaret walked me to the door, her expression warm and inviting. "Take care of yourself, Andrew." "You're welcome anytime," she said softly, her words sincere and reassuring. "Thank you." "Good night, Margaret," I replied, stepping out into the cool night air. It was quiet outside, the silence broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. As I headed to my car, I reflected on the evening before. Despite its simplicity, it had been unexpectedly pleasant. Margaret's warmth and candor had left a lasting impression, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time I found myself on her doorstep to share a quiet moment while the rest of the world lived outside. Even as I drove away, the memories of her laughter and the serene atmosphere of her home never left me. It wasn't just tea or conversation, but a sense of connection that made the evening so memorable. I deeply appreciated Margaret's ability to give meaning to even the simplest of moments, and looked forward to the next opportunity to share that moment with her again.